feel like we need some music or something.
I know. I go ahead and share my screen too.
It's my favorite part, watching the participant number grow at the bottom.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today our How to Pay for College webinar presented by Access Scholarships and Ascent Funding. My name is Alicia, and I will be kicking things off today. I'll go ahead and give everyone just a few more minutes to go ahead and join the call before we officially get started. I know we have tons of people tuning in today, so whether you're wrapping up your last class for the day or relaxing after a full day of work, either way, we're super excited to have you all join. And we really do have a unique audience here today. I think we have high school students and some college students, international students, and even some parents too. So we're super happy that you could all make it. Our elite group of panelists are thrilled to be here as well, and they're ready to share such amazing tips with you on how you can make the most out of your financial aid package, from the FAFSA to scholarships and student loans. We'll be covering it all today. I did want to let you know that this webinar will be recorded. So if your internet cuts out for a second or you step away from your computer, you can always just rewatch the recorded version later. If you're like me and always say you're going to watch the recorded version, but never actually get around to it, I highly recommend you go ahead and take a second to go and find a pen, piece of paper, or even just open up a blank Word document on your computer to take some notes. That would be awesome. We do plan on covering a lot today, so I wouldn't want you to miss anything. Also, just want to let you know our Q&A feature will be open throughout the webinar as well. So please feel free to send us any questions that you may have as our panelists are speaking today. We'll go ahead and dedicate some time at the end to answer any questions you do have at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I would love for each of our panelists to go ahead and take a second to introduce themselves. And we'll go ahead and go in order with the order that we have here on screen. So Ayden, did you want to kick things off?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Alicia. Hi, everyone. My name is Ayden Berkey. I'm one of the co-founders of Access Scholarships, a platform which I will discuss more in the scholarships portion of the webinar. I am a recent college graduate. I attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I graduated in 2020. So I still consider myself a student, and I'm super excited to be here to talk to all of you about scholarships.
That's great, thanks, Ayden, and I'm excited to be joining this panel. My name is Ken Ruggiero. I'm CEO and co-founder of the Ascent funding business. And for you high school students, yes, I graduated from public high school. For you college students, I was a first-time learner, and I paid my way through college by saving and only taking a small amount of student loans. And for you parents in the room, I'm the proud parent, along with my wife, of getting two sons into and out of college in 4 years with limited student loan debt. So very excited to be talking to you about how to pay for school, and look forward to your questions and feedback.
And I'm Bill Brosseau. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Ascent Funding, but I always think of myself as a financial aid administrator at heart. I spent the first decade of my professional career working at Georgetown University in DC, helping families and students navigate the paying for college experience. So I look forward to talking to you today about how to navigate that journey.
Awesome. Thank you guys all so much for taking a second to introduce yourselves before we actually get to your section of the webinar. One last thing before we go ahead and kick things off, I did want to remind everyone joining today that just for registering and attending the event, you entered yourself to win a $500 gift card $500 giveaway. So we will go ahead and reach out to the winner sometime this week to claim the prize. So be on the lookout for an email from us. And with that, I will go ahead and kick it off to Bill if you want to go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Alicia. So thanks for letting me talk with you today. This is an important topic that is dear to my heart. I became a financial aid administrator some 25 years ago mainly because I made all the mistakes that students make when they try to figure out how to pay for college. And the difference between the 1990s and the 2020s is that the costs have become so much higher these days that mistakes have material impacts that I was lucky to be able to work through. I have been doing these presentations for a long time, and I reflected a bit on why I was doing these. And 20 years ago, when I was giving these talks, it was because I was a recent student who made the mistakes, and I could relate to students coming into a new journey that they didn't quite know all the answers to. Today, my oldest daughter is getting ready to go off to college, and although I'm an expert, I guess, in the paying for college experience, I still have a ton of anxiety. And so I hope that I can impart some wisdom and some tips and some tricks that help you in ease some of your concerns. So the first poll question here is how long do you think it takes to complete the FAFSA? Is it more than 3 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, or less than an hour? So I'm gonna just pause for just a couple seconds and let you make a guess at how long you think it takes to complete the FAFSA. Alicia, how's the polling coming?
Good. We have over 80% of the vote in. So do you want to go ahead and
Yeah,
share the results?
Let's see what the answers are. Yeah, so about a third of everyone picked less than an hour, and I think if we asked your parents how long it took them to complete the FAFSA, it probably would have been in the 1 to 2 hour mark. But today, through some technical improvements to the FAFSA, it should take you less than an hour to complete the FAFSA. So well done for the third that guessed less than an hour. Let's go ahead and move on, Alicia. So a couple of myths that I want to dispel here. The first myth is the applications are so complicated, and I think the forms that you complete for colleges to determine your eligibility for financial aid are often mystified in both schools and in the media, and the forms themselves are not particularly complicated. They're going to ask you information to questions that either you or your parents already know and come directly from your tax returns. And so the way to get through it being complicated is to be prepared. And we'll talk more about that shortly. Myth number 2 is my parents make too much money, so I probably won't qualify. And a couple of things have happened over time. One of those unfortunate things is that the cost of education has continued to escalate. And so more families are qualifying for what we would categorize as need-based financial aid than ever before. One of the important things to take away from today is that the applications that we're talking about here are just eligibility tools. They're not actually loan applications. And they're used to determine, in theory, a family's ability to pay. And it's really a math formula. And so depending on the colleges that you're interested in and the state that you're in, completing the FAFSA becomes critically important so that you don't lose out on the ability to take advantage of government or state funding. Many states require that the FAFSA, which is the federal form, is completed to qualify for their own state grant programs. Some of those programs are need-based, others are not need-based. but still require the FAFSA. So if you're looking for a reason to why I should complete it, it's because if you don't, it's likely that you could miss out on an opportunity to be reviewed for some type of federal financial aid or state financial aid. And myth number 3 is only students with good grades are eligible for financial aid. And that's certainly not true. Many students get financial aid for a number of reasons outside of their academic performance. And so, completing the FAFSA and any institutional forms will allow you to make sure that you get the proper review for any eligibility for financial aid. There's a couple of things that I would love for you to leave this presentation knowing. And if you turned off your camera or your audio after this slide, I think that you would leave with more information than you came with. The first is that this is not all about the forms. If completing the forms is all that you want to do, you likely have missed out on an opportunity. These forms are just collecting data, and they more often than not don't tell a college what your world is really like. And so this is an active participation process that requires you to not just complete the forms, but also talk with individual schools about why the calculations or a school's assessment of your ability to pay may not be realistic. Every school across the country, without exception, wants to help students. And they can only do that if you participate in the process. Now, there's a fine line between being a pain in the neck and in a proactive parent advocating for your child. But it is important that you reach out to schools. Now, the answer to almost every question is it depends, because although there are guardrails and rules created by both the federal government and state, each school is going to interpret those a little bit differently. And so if you have some unique circumstances, or you need to know an answer to a specific question, you can't depend on one school to answer that question for all of the other schools that your child might be interested in. And then lastly, you're going to hear me say this more than once tonight, but deadlines are critical. If you miss a deadline, you've missed out on something. And so it is true that schools both run out of money and also address financial aid applications in the order in which they arrive. And so timeliness becomes a really critical component of making sure that you've given yourself the best opportunity to qualify for the most financial aid at individual schools. Now, this is an important statement that at one point used to be posted in most financial aid offices, but colleges distribute a finite amount of money as equitably as possible. And there's two really important words here. The word finite means that schools run out of money. And the word equitably means that there is some methodology that they are using to distribute their financial aid. And so it's important to understand, as you kind of build the list of schools that you're interested in, what the school's methodology is. There are schools that distribute financial aid only on the basis of financial need. There are schools that distribute financial aid only on the basis of merit. And merit is a pretty broad category. It could be that you're an excellent academic student. It could also mean that you're the only violinist from the state of Alaska, and the school really wants a violinist from Alaska. And so understanding how a school distributes their financial aid is a critically important component that you want to make sure that you know. Let's go on to the next slide, Alicia. There are two primary types or categories of financial aid programs. There are need-based institutions. Those include many of the Ivy League schools. So there are 0 undergraduate students at Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton, Georgetown, amongst others, on an academic scholarship. So they distribute their financial aid, their institutional financial aid, purely based on a family's ability to pay. And then there are merit-based institutions that are looking for some attribute that they find valuable to their student body, either from a cultural perspective, diversity perspective, an equity perspective, a performance perspective. All of those are schools, are merit-based opportunities. Now, every school, at least you can advance, every school uses the same three components of a financial aid package. There are scholarships or grants, loans, and work. And so every school across the country has used these same three components really since 1965. And what your mission is to find out how to maximize your own personal eligibility for each of these components. So let's go ahead and advance. Alicia will talk a little bit about the different loan programs. The federal loan program offers undergraduate students the ability to borrow differing amounts on an annual basis. There are both need-based loans and a subsidized Stafford loan, as well as non-need-based loans and an unsubsidized. So these loans are fixed interest rates. It's a relatively low interest rate today. It's 3.7% for undergraduate students. And as freshmen, you can borrow up to $4,500. As sophomore, you can borrow up to $5,500. And a junior and senior year, you can borrow up to $7,500. And so it allows you to use the federal loan program with good interest rates without a cosigner or any collateral to help defray some of the costs of your college experience. So what is the FAFSA? We've used that acronym quite a bit, and it is an acronym. It stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And it is a form that collects information that is primarily derived from a family's federal tax return and any other banking statements. Each year it opens on October 1st. And the federal deadline for completing the FAFSA isn't until June 30th of the year that the student enters that academic year. That federal deadline is well past any school or state deadlines. And so earlier we talked about how do we not miss a deadline? Well, that has to do with being organized and creating a folder, a notebook, or any other type of organizational tool so that you can begin to write down what each individual priority deadline and drop deadline is for each of the applications that a school may require. The federal application, although takes over 100 questions to complete, actually only asks you 6 primary questions. It asks you how much you make, how much you have in savings, how much you paid in taxes, how big your family is, how many students are in college, and how old your parents are. Those are the 6 things it basically asks. Now, it takes a lot of questions to get there because it's going to ask about, do you have 529 accounts, and do you have savings accounts or brokerage accounts? Lots of questions that are very specific about the types of savings vehicles or income that you may have. But those are the 6 primary things that it's going to ask you. So you must complete the FAFSA every year. So this is not a one and done scenario. Every year you'll complete a new FAFSA that will calculate a new expected family contribution that the school will use. It is important that you file the FAFSA as soon as possible. One of the reasons why people often don't fill it out right away is because they're afraid of making mistakes. So there's a couple of things that protect you. First, lots of people make mistakes. the new FAFSA has some really good audits built into it to help you from keeping some of the very common mistakes that people make, like using a parent's social security number and your social security number as one and the same. Like saying that you have 10 siblings when your parents only claim one student on their federal tax return. There's lots of very common mistakes that the FAFSA has, but it's also okay to make mistakes. It gives you the opportunity to go back and correct those mistakes at a later date. And so a wise financial aid administrator once told me that it was better to be on time than correct, because you can go back and make correct happen later. There is also the requirement that the student and one parent get a federal student aid ID. And if you go to the Department of Education's website, fafsa.gov, it'll show you how to get your FSA ID. This is your digital signature for the FAFSA. So again, the student and one parent must have an FSA ID. And again, don't worry about mistakes. There's a difference between making honest mistakes and lying. We expect that most mistakes on the FAFSA are just that. They're just errors. And so there's a way to go back and make those changes at a later date. But make sure that you get all of your forms in by the deadline. Couple of eligibility requirements for federal financial aid. The first is that you have a high school diploma, a GED, or that you've completed homeschooling. You must have a social security number. You must be a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen. And if you're a male, you must be registered for selective services. You will also need to be enrolled in a degree seeking program at an eligible institution. And you have to maintain satisfactory academic progress while you're in school. There is a probationary period for students that might struggle academically, but you must maintain satisfactory academic progress to continue receiving federal financial aid. So I often tell families that the paying for college is a process, not an event. But every year, as you begin to complete the applications, it's important that you gather some information before you sit down and try to jump into the actual form. The first is you need to make sure you've got your social security number. If you are an eligible non-citizen, you'll need your alien registration number. You'll need a copy of your 2 year ago tax return. So this is not based on 2021 taxes, it's based on 2020 taxes. And so it'll ask you for information that comes directly from your federal tax return. And it will actually say, if you filed a 1040, look on line 7 and write that number here. And so it's going to guide you pretty efficiently through completing the actual application. Any records of untaxed income, and untaxed income could be contributions to your 401k. It's important that you know that on the FAFSA, it's going to ask you for any cash savings or balances in non-retirement accounts. It does not ask you for how much is in your 401, 403, KEO, Simple, whatever retirement plan that you have, only for cash savings, checking, and brokerage accounts that are not part of eligible retirement accounts. And this is what the journey looks like. Once you've completed the FAFSA and signed it with your FSA ID, the output of that is a student aid report. And you'll be able to download it if you would like, but the student aid report is a summary of all of the information that you completed in the actual application. It's also going to give you what's called your EFC, which is your expected family contribution. And that EFC is a combined contribution of both parents and students based on the information that you submitted in the FAFSA. And I can assure you that the number is going to be higher than you would ever expect. And for those of you that have completed it in the past, nothing has changed. It is a big number. And so I don't want you to be shocked by that. That information is going to be sent to the colleges that you added to your FAFSA. The FAFSA allows you to send this information electronically to up to 10 schools. If you are applying to more than 10 schools, you need to confirm with the first 10 that they received the information and have downloaded it. And once they have downloaded it, you can erase them going back into the FAFSA application and add any new schools 10 at a time. Now, the last step of this is really where it gets important, and it's about reviewing the financial aid packages that you receive from the schools that you've been admitted to. And there's a couple of things to look for. The first is we all love getting scholarships. The important part of every financial aid package is going to be what the out-of-pocket expenses are for the family. And that's often the last number, not the first number that is on a financial aid award letter. And then you begin to evaluate which of those schools offers the best opportunity for success at a price and a financing option that puts you in the best position going forward. I will say this again at the end. The objective for every student, every family, is graduation. And so sometimes the cheapest school isn't the one that gives the student the most likelihood to be successful. And so there are things like location and culture and degrees and internship opportunities that add value to an institution that may be slightly more expensive than another school. And so again, as you review your financial aid awards and look at the out-of-pocket expenses, also take into account that success is how we measure whether you made the right decision or not. So once you've completed the FAFSA, make sure that you check your emails. You're going to get a ton of information from the Department of Education, including a summary student aid report. Parents should be checking theirs as well. Update any and make any corrections or add additional schools directly through the FSA website. Be an active participant. Follow up with your schools in your award letters. If you don't think that it's an accurate representation of your ability to pay, and remember, ability and willingness are two different things, make sure you tell the school why. And remember that most financial aid is a math formula. And so if you're unable to afford it, try to think of the reasons. What are the numbers? Maybe you have large credit card debt that they didn't take into consideration because you had some medical expenses, or maybe your parents are caring for their parents. None of those questions exist on the FAFSA. And so schools have the ability to try to continue to help you and get closer to meeting a family's need and be more reflective of their ability to pay. And then last, look for scholarships. Start early, be thorough, be thoughtful about the scholarships that you're looking for, and don't miss any opportunity to submit an essay, to get your transcripts in, all of the tasks that are required for those outside scholarship opportunities. This is another statement that most financial aid offices believe in their heart. And this is about how they communicate with families and students on a daily basis. And to the extent that they are able, it's a parent's responsibility to pay for their dependent child's education. And it's important here that we that we understand what ability is. And all schools are trying to give families enough financial aid to make it possible. This isn't about my mom said that she would pay whatever it costs to go to the state school, to a private school. That's not an ability question. That's a family decision that is important to be respectful of. But a school's job is to try to create a financial aid package that meets a family's ability to be successful at their institution. And then last, a couple of last minute takeaways here. This is an active process. Don't be afraid to call schools. They get questions about what they did on a daily basis. And so questioning their calculations is totally in bounds and something that you should be doing on a regular basis. Understand what types of financial aid are available at the colleges that your child is interested in. Is it a need-based institution? Is it a merit-based institution? If it is merit-based, how do you qualify for more? What information do you need to submit as a supplement to the forms that you've already completed? Read the financial aid award letters very carefully. Understand what your out-of-pocket expenses will be, and then make really critical evaluations of where your child, or if you're the student, where you think you'll be most successful. And deadlines, deadlines, deadlines. There is no more important part of this process than making sure that you don't inadvertently miss out on an opportunity for financial aid. And you do that immediately if you miss a deadline. So thank you for your time today. I'm going to hand the mic over to Ayden, who's going to talk about scholarship hacks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bill. And really, I mean, so much of what you spoke about in terms of deadlines and organization, the importance of meeting the deadlines and staying organized is definitely all information that is super relevant when we're talking about scholarships. So be prepared to hear a little bit of a repeat when it comes to those things. But why don't we start by kicking it off with our poll question, which Alicia will launch. The question: you can only apply to scholarships when you've been accepted into a school. True or false? We'll give you guys 15, 20 seconds to take your pick, and then we'll go over the answer. I feel like I need like the Jeopardy timer when we put poll questions up. So it's like a little countdown, but.
Yeah, it looks like we have 80% of the vote into Ayden, so I will go ahead and launch the results.
Awesome. This is a stat that I love to see, and 94% of you are correct. The reality when it comes to scholarships is that you can apply for scholarships when you're in high school, when you're in college, when you're in grad school, all of the above. And as we go through the presentation, I'll be talking about different types of scholarships that are available to different types of students, so on and so forth. So why don't we just jump right in? So lots of things that we will be discussing today, but just to give you all a brief rundown, I'll start by just defining what a scholarship is. We'll go into discussing a few different types of scholarships, and furthermore, I guess more segmented, there are certain categories of scholarships within those types. We'll also talk about where to search for scholarships, the importance of developing a strategy as you apply for them. And then we'll end off with some tips for applying, including also some tips on specifically for tackling those essays, because I know that they can be a bit of a pain sometimes. So what is a scholarship? Some of you, most of you, there might be a range of you who know what the definition is, but for anyone who doesn't, the formal definition is a grant or payment made to support a student's education, can be awarded on the basis of academic achievements or other achievements. And the important, part of this definition that I think really stands out is the other achievement aspect of it. There are a few different types of scholarships that I mentioned, right? So first we have merit-based. These are scholarships that are based off of your GPA, your school transcript, your test scores, your class rank, things that are specifically just geared towards your academic profile. And then second, we have need-based scholarships. These are based on your family income, your EFC on the FAFSA, which is a term that Bill mentioned earlier, but those are basically just based on your ability to pay for college. So if you are categorized as need-based, every scholarship is different in terms of what that threshold is, but that is another type of scholarship. And then finally, our third type of scholarship is basically just a combination of merit and need / everything else. So I guess the main point in the definition that I wanted to emphasize is that scholarships do not only have to be on the basis of academic achievements. They can be based on your leadership, your passion for a certain cause, your extracurricular involvement, maybe like through a hobby or a sport that you're involved in or a club, anything like that. So scholarships are really not specifically only geared towards academics, which is really great because it just means that there are so many more opportunities out there to apply for. So I know that I just talked about types of scholarships and I mix up type and category a little bit, but we talked about merit, we talked about need, we talked about other, and so there are a few, I guess, subsections or types of scholarships that exist within those categories. So the first one is private scholarships. And private scholarships are essentially any opportunities that are not, sorry, Alicia, you could just double tap one more time. Are opportunities that are hosted by specific organizations, companies, nonprofits. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with companies like Taco Bell, like Coca-Cola, Apple, Microsoft. The Gates Foundation offers a scholarship. So those are just a few of the hundreds and thousands of private scholarship opportunities that are out there. So that's one category that we have. And the second category is state and federal scholarships. So these are scholarships, sometimes also known as grants, that come from either the state entity or the federal government. So the important thing that I want to note here, which Bill touched on a little bit in his presentation, is just the importance of filing the FAFSA in order to be considered eligible for those scholarships and grants. So by filing the FAFSA, you are really unlocking the key to all federal grant opportunities. But in most situations, filing the FAFSA is also a prerequisite to be considered for any state grants. So by filing it, it's basically you're knocking two things at once. So definitely an important thing to do and important to apply as early as possible after the FAFSA opens on October 1st. So that is category number 2. And then finally, we have our institution-based opportunities. So these are for prospective and current undergraduate students. So basically, if you're about to go to college, you're in the process of applying, or if you're a current college student, these are scholarships that are specifically just for you, that are offered only at your college or university. So like I mentioned, scholarships can really fall into lots of different categories and buckets. But once you get to college, or if you're already there, you'll find that there are tons of opportunities available based on your major, your area of study, even your extracurricular involvement on campus. So the next question that we have is, where can I find scholarships to apply for? And I get this question all the time, and there are 3 main places that I really lead students towards in order to make the process of finding scholarships a little bit easier, because I was a student not too long ago, and I like to be organized. So when I think of approaching any sort of thing, such as applying for scholarships, super important in my head to have a few different categories compartmentalized. So here I am going to share them with you. The first one is online platforms and resources. So I talked a little bit about private scholarship opportunities earlier, and online platforms and search engines like Access Scholarships, which is my organization, we have our own database of around 6,000 private scholarship opportunities that students, parents, everyone in between can log on, search through, and apply for. But in addition to the Access Scholarships platform, you can also utilize Google. You can utilize plenty of other scholarship search engines out there. I know that Ascent also has scholarships on their website as well. So definitely there's the online portion of things. And then next up, we have your local community and your surrounding high school resources. So this one is specific to, or more specific, I should say, to high school students. While you are still in high school, it's super important to be reaching out to your school counselor, to your sports coaches, to your parents and your parents' friends, and basically everyone in your community, even, areas of worship, Rotary clubs, basically anything in your community where, even small businesses, anything in your community where you have a feeling that there's a possibility that they could offer a scholarship, there's no harm in reaching out to see if they actually do. And if they do, then applying for that, because local scholarships are super important when it comes to the process, since you're not competing against people from all over the world. So that's the second category of where to find scholarships. And thirdly, we have your financial aid office or your college-specific scholarship database. So as we mentioned earlier, the process of searching and applying for scholarships is not only for high school students, and it's not only for college students. So when you do get to college, or if you're already there, you'll find that your financial aid office probably has its own, specific website or section of the website that's dedicated towards listing out scholarship resources. So maybe that's a list of, scholarship search engines that are out there, or lots of colleges actually do have their own specific databases of internal opportunities that you can apply for just paying off your education in general, or sometimes they're for study abroad, sometimes they're specific to be used towards technology or textbooks, but that is the third and final area for where to find scholarships. So now, I always think it's super helpful, rather than just throwing a bunch of info at you, to kind of go into some actual concrete tips on how to apply for scholarships so that you can, win as much money as possible, because that is the name of the game here. So the first tip that we have is to double check the eligibility requirements before you get started on the application, definitely before you submit it. One thing that I do want to note, or I guess point out, is that a lot of times in the eligibility requirements, you have to read very carefully to, make sure, okay, if it requires a 3.0 GPA, do I have that? If it requires that you are a US citizen, am I a US citizen, X, Y, and Z. So there are lots of scholarships out there where you will really have to read into like the specific terms and conditions, or maybe the fine print in the eligibility requirements, to make sure that, oh, is this scholarship open to international students who are currently not based in the US but are planning on studying in the US? So those are questions that, are important to ask yourself, and just things to keep in mind, because the last thing you want to do is get to the way end of, working on a bunch of essays for one scholarship and then realize that you're not eligible. So double check the eligibility requirements 100%. Number two, we have diversified the types of scholarships that you apply for. So this means not only applying for scholarships that are of varying range of amount, but it also just means, not only focusing on applying for engineering scholarships if you're an engineering major, right? There are so many different aspects of who you are as a person and who you are as a student that you can really leverage as you go through the process of searching and applying for scholarships. So maybe you're an engineering student, but you could also be, part of a minority, or maybe you can apply for specific scholarships for engineering students within your specific state. So there are lots of other things that you can really leverage in the process. So definitely don't pigeonhole yourself into just one small category. Number three, and this is something that I'm sure most of you have, come across at some point, whether it's from, applying for college, applying for internships, anything in between. When it comes to applying for scholarships as well, rejection is inevitable. So the main way, or I guess the most important, aspect of working on this process is to, always continue to ask for feedback. The important thing is learning from your mistakes so that as you go along in the process, you're growing, you're taking notes of things that you maybe could have done better, so that as you continue on through the process, you are making improvements and you're winning more money and you're being successful. So don't be afraid to ask for feedback. And number four, super, super, super important, to give your essays the attention and time that they deserve. So oftentimes your essays, similar to the college application process, your essays can really sometimes be the only place in your entire application where you actually have the ability to explain yourself, to expand on your academic achievements, to expand on your non-academic achievements, everything else. So the space for your essays is super important. And so that's why on this next slide, I'll just be going over specific essay tips. Right, a few quick notes on tackling the essays. So a strong introduction, in my opinion, is really one of the most powerful ways to make your essay stand out. So really when it comes to, applying for scholarships, especially if you're applying for super competitive scholarships like, Coca-Cola Scholars Program, the Gates Scholarship, those are, basically full ride opportunities. They're going to get a ton of applicants. So really you need to make sure that you're starting off on the strongest note possible, because when the scholarship committee is reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of essays, they need something to latch onto when they, flip to your application, right? So maybe that means starting out with a hook or with a quote, or really just anything to kind of immerse the reader into, whatever it is that you're planning on talking about. So really, right from the get-go, you just want to basically tell them, here's who I am and here's why you should remember me out of all the other applicants. Number two, and I've seen this way too often, so that's why I felt like I had to include it on here. Avoid cherry picking when it comes to tackling the prompt. So I know that sometimes scholarships will, list off, let's say 3 or 4 different questions. Sometimes they'll say, pick one question out of the list of 4 and only respond to that one question. And when that's the case, totally fine. You pick your one question and you answer it in its entirety. But when they have, a few different questions and they say, please answer all of the questions, that really truly does mean to answer all of the questions. So, and to do so in a way where you're not, spending 90% of your essay answering one and then, maybe adding one sentence at the end to answer the rest. So really, when a prompt does have multiple questions, make sure that you are tackling them in some sort of equitable way. And then number 3, this is a super important one. Don't be afraid to repurpose old essays that you're proud of. So whether that was, a few years ago, if you wrote your college supplements or your application essays, and now all of a sudden you're sitting down to apply for some scholarships and you feel that the prompts are pretty similar or they overlap in a few ways, don't be afraid to, pull out those old essays that you've written and, see if there's ways that you can kind of incorporate older content into this new essay. It's obviously great because if you were super proud of that essay, then hopefully it will take you a long way now, but it also saves you a ton of time. So definitely do not be afraid to do that. And then 4th and finally, well, there's one more thing I'm going to mention at the end, but 4th, we have please, please, please edit and proofread your essays. I can tell you all from experience that, I mean, I know from writing hundreds of essays probably that, you know, the last thing that you probably want to do after you've spent so much time brainstorming and drafting and writing an essay is to sit down all the way at the end and read it through one last time. But I promise you that it does go a long way, because no one wants to read an essay that has typos, or maybe that even has like the wrong scholarship organization name on top of the essay. Those are things that are like really quick fixes when it comes to grammar, spelling, etc. So make sure that you do that you take the time to properly edit and proofread your essay. Maybe even ask a friend or a parent or a teacher or me to help you go over your essay to make sure that it's as strong as it possibly can be. And last but not least, I do have 3 of my own scholarship opportunities. In case you haven't applied for any of them, we have a bunch of scholarships. 2 of them, the Too Cool to Pay for School and the Climate Justice Scholarship, are open to both high school and college students studying in the US. And the Around the Corner from College Scholarship is a $1,000 opportunity, specifically geared towards helping any of you who are in high school to get ready for everything that the college application process has in store for you. So those are just a few quick opportunities. Feel free to take a screenshot of the page because I have the links right there. And with that, I'm going to toss it over to talk about private loan, or student loans, private loans. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much, Ayden. That's wonderful that your business is built to help students who are looking for as many ways to chip away at their tuition bill. Alicia is going to run us another poll right now. I get to back clean up and talk about private versus federal student loans, and Bill got to make it rain with federal aid money and access to low cost federal loans, and then Ayden got to make it rain, and I'm just rain. So if you get through all that free money, you get through all the savings, and you still can't afford the cost of college, you have limited options. And I'm going to talk to you about the options to borrow money from the federal government, the Department of Education, and from the private sector, companies like Ascent that lend money to families who need it. So our first poll question has been put up. Which percent of students use private student loans to cover their education costs? And we hear a lot about student loans in the press. Sometimes I see the headlines so much, I think the answer is 100%, and the answer is not 100%. When Alicia shares it, you'll see that at the private student loan level, it's 13%. So we got 20%. This is a hard one to guess. I had to look it up on the internet because even someone who traffics in student loans didn't have this number memorized. The federal number is I would say only 30%. So you don't have a majority of people taking student loans. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. What we preach at Ascent is a student loan is an investment in your future, and you should evaluate that investment similar to what Bill was discussing earlier. You've got to look at the outcomes that you're expecting to get from your time in school. You've got to look at your opportunity cost versus your alternatives. You've got to look at your academic acumen and maturity. All of those are things when you're investing time and money, you should be evaluating really honestly with yourself and those who you trust around you. In the next slide, you're going to see that it is very confusing. The world of student loans loves to throw a lot of words that you've maybe never seen through high school, or even if you got into college and didn't look at loans. The federal government doesn't make it easy. They use words like grace period and deferment, and we hear about deferment not very often in anyone's common language. There's also words like forbearance, which was new to me when I got involved with the federal programs. ACH, you'll see on a lot of your checks, it's an automated clearinghouse. So there's all of these words and vocabulary that is very normal to people that Bill was referencing. So the folks in the financial aid office, these are all normal words. They throw them around really quickly, and because they use them so often, they think the students understand them, and they don't. So if you're hearing words around financial products and you're not sure, don't be shy. Just say, whoa, whoa, slow down. I need to know what my options are, because these words, I Googled them and I still can't understand what forbearance is. And then I read it in the agreement, and that's still confusing about whether or not I qualify. So do your homework, but don't feel bad. What we wanted to do in this slide is to show you what one of those award letters looks like. And we've highlighted for here the EFC that Bill spoke about earlier, the expected family contribution. Now on this list is the number of federal grants that the student has qualified for, and then even more confusing words like non-need-based loans. Well, that feels kind of like I applied for the loan because I needed it, but now you're telling me that I've got an allocation of non-need-based loans. So it's not normal English, but it's also not going to change. So the reason that we highlight those couple of arrows is because very often we run into families that forget about that EFC, and they look all the way down at the grants and the loans, and they go, wow, my unmet need of my unmet financial need is only $276, when in fact, and Bill mentioned this earlier, that EFC is always higher than you expect. It's quite often higher than what you have in your savings account. So very often families are thinking they only need to solve for the 276, and they really need the 276 in our example plus the $2,900. So really read these forms. Get the school on the phone and say, hey, I need you to walk me through what's a loan, what's work study. We talked about work study earlier, and they don't call it work study on this form. They call it self-help aid need-based. That's work study. Again, work study, weird set of words. Am I working, or am I studying, or am I getting paid to study? Fun fact, you don't get paid to study at college. You got to work and then find time to study. And you know, like I did, work in the mailroom in the poli-sci. It was easy. I just took time away from studying. So on the next slide, we talk about what percentage of the loan. So we're talking about private versus federal loans. So when you hear that headline about how much debt is owed by students, 92% of that debt is owed to the federal government. So the federal government is taking tax dollars and investing grants and loans in the education of the populace. It's great. But you want to borrow responsibly, and the loans that the federal government have, especially for undergraduates who don't have a cosigner, or don't have a job, or don't have a FICO score, those are very good loans. And at Ascent and any other lender in the country, they all say fill out the FAFSA. If you qualify for federal loans, you should take those loans. They're almost always at the undergraduate level, lower interest rates for the student themselves. And there is an origination fee, but it's a good loan to take, and it comes with good deferment options that not all lenders have. So what are private student loans? So we talked about what is the federal loan, and Bill did a good job describing the different features there. Well, private student loans are made by banks or specialty finance lenders, and they're made based off of looking at the borrower's really two primary variables. One, do you have good credit? And I put here 640 FICO and above, but some lenders want you to have 680 or even 700. So it depends on a credit union versus a community bank versus your neighborhood bank or someone that you might find online. So there's different FICO requirements, and they look for you to have steady income. And very often students have income, but it's not steady. It's a summer job, it's a part-time job while they're working. So students often, especially at the undergraduate level, don't qualify for private student loans without a cosigner. On the next slide, thanks to the wonder of the internet. So one of the things we like to talk about is what does a private lender look for? And there's a misconception about private student loans, and I keep separating undergraduate from graduate loans. So So at the undergraduate level, if you don't have a cosigner, you're going to get a very cost-effective loan from the federal government. But if you're a parent looking at a PLUS loan, or you're a graduate student, in the market today, where we are with interest rates, there's a lot of lenders, including Ascent, that have more competitive rates than the federal government. And as I'll talk about in a slide or two, it's not always about the rates. It's about the other terms and benefits that come with the loan. So we always recommend, like, we would love you to take every loan that you need for college from Ascent. We understand that everyone's circumstances are different. We encourage everyone to shop around and look for the best price. So there's really 3 major steps you need to do before you apply, even though we've got 4 here. The first really big one is, how much money do I need? And it is confusing about how much money you need and when you need it, when you think about paying rent and getting into school and getting, all the way through the first semester and the second semester. But figuring out how much money you need, not how much money you want, not how much money the school told you need. You've got to do a budget and say, okay, in the first semester, I need this number, and this is how much loans and grants and work study and part-time jobs I'm going to do, or how much my parents can pay out of current income, because we don't want you to overborrow. The federal government doesn't want you to overborrow. And very often, the way that the aid is packaged, it incents overborrowing, because you find out you qualify for $5,000 of federal loans, and you just take it, and you didn't need it, but you took it because you could, and now you owe $5,000, and that's often not the most wise choice. Now, on the next slide, you'll see that you have to choose an interest rate. There's something called an APR, which I used to think stood for April. It doesn't. It's a way that we talk to the borrowers about what the cost of the loan is when you include fees or any kind of deferment periods. There's also something called variable rates and fixed rates, and we've been in a very low rate environment, so variable rates and fixed interest rates don't have that big of a difference. But if you've been following the news, the Federal Reserve is talking about increasing interest rates over the course of time. So you need to be really careful when you're picking your interest rate, that you're comfortable with. If it's a fixed rate and it's a little bit higher than a variable rate right now, that you're okay, because you know what that number will be, and that interest rate won't change over the term of the loan. If you think that the variable interest rate is going to be a better cost for you, then pick the variable interest rate. But what we've seen in rising rate environments is that the variable interest rate might start below the fixed, but it will end up higher than the fixed, which just increases the cost of the debt and the total cost of your education as well. So the next is to pick a term, and the term is the duration of the loan. And the federal government loans I was discussing earlier, they're all standard at 10 years. They don't give you a chance. They don't let you pick. They don't worry about the interest rate. They picked it for you. They don't worry about variable or fixed. They made it fixed. They don't worry about 5, 10, or 15 years, and there's often more choices than this. We made this for an example. They just give you 10, and so it's simple, but it lacks some of the other choices that we think are important when people are trying to plan their future. Now, one thing that is really important, whether you pick a 5, 10, or 15-year loan, you can pay faster, you can prepay without any penalties, and that goes for the federal loans as well. And what we're highlighting here are a couple of things. The longer the loan is, quite often, the more interest rate you'll be charged by the lender. And that makes sense if you think about risk. If the lender thinks they'll get their money back in 5 years, that they can charge you less. And if they think it's going to be 15 years, a lot of life happens in 15 years. So they're going to charge you a little bit more, but not a lot more in our example. So very often people are, I think, solving for the wrong thing. So sometimes they look for the lowest interest rate, which isn't a bad thing, but in looking for the lowest interest rate, you end up at the shortest term. And then when you graduate, you end up, in our example, having to pay for this $10,000 loan $194 a month. So if you've got a great job and you come out hot, that's not going to be a problem. But if it takes you a while to get into the job market, and when you get in, it's in a part-time job or it's in an entry-level job that's going to get you to your next job, maybe having that lower payment is a better idea. And you could always pay $194 a month, but it's good to fall back on $90 a month if that's all you can have to stay current on your debts. So be really careful when you're solving for a term and you're solving for interest rate, because they have long-term effects if this isn't obvious with the total costs of interest and principal in our example. So another thing that happens during the application period with a private loan, unlike a federal loan, the federal loan, when the student borrows it, you go right into deferment. So you don't have to pay anything. They don't ask you to pay anything, and many people take that option. They don't pay anything to the federal government while they're in school, and that's not a bad thing. Private lenders, they ask you to make a decision. They generally give you three choices. One, pick the federal government's plan, which is, I don't want to pay anything on a monthly basis. I'll go into deferment and I'll worry about it later. Two, I understand that interest keeps adding to my loan balance, which in our world, it increases your total cost of education. And if I can pay $25 a month, or I can pay just the interest while I'm in school, then when I graduate in 4 years or whatever the number is, that $10,000 will be $10,000. Now the caution to that goes back to your planning. If you say I'm going to pay $25 a month and help keep the cost of interest low, you got to pay $25 a month, because you'll end up banging up your credit. And we've seen this happen with really well-meaning students and families. They say, hey, I think we can pay $25 a month, and then someone gets sick, someone gets sadly divorced, or someone loses their part-time job, and then they start hurting their credit because they have a delinquency. And I think that brings us to our last slide? Yeah, don't hide. So if you have something that goes on in your life, whether you're in school and making a payment, or whether you're out of school, whether it's a federal loan servicer or a private student loan servicer, no one can help you or explain your options if you don't talk. So, and what we've seen are when people are struggling financially, they don't want to talk about it. And that's, from an emotional side, it's sad. From a logic side, it's understandable. But from a practical perspective, it's horrible. The federal loan servicers have an enormous amount of plans that, whether it's income-based repayment or economic hardship forbearances, private lenders like Ascent and others during COVID, we got affected borrowers on the phone and said, hey, if you've been affected by COVID, we can put your loan into deferment. We can all figure it out later. So make sure you're up to date with your contact information with your servicer, and make sure that you're keeping in contact with them to understand your options if you enter any distress. I know we ran late, and I know we saved the most exciting for last, but I think Alicia is going to come on and see if there's any questions that the group has for the panelists.
Yes, thank you so much, Ken, and thank you so much to all of our panelists today who spoke and just shared such great tips and advice for everyone on the call today. I know we did go a little bit over, and we're so thankful for everyone who did stay on to catch the last little bit that we had to share with you today. And we did have some questions that came in through the Q&A. So I will go ahead and Bill, was there anything you wanted to, as maybe more attendees are taking the time to submit questions, are there any other questions that you saw that came in throughout the webinar that you wanted to address?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. How many times do we do that a day? No, there were a lot of really great questions in the chat. A couple of them that were repetitive had to do about whether applying for financial aid impacted admissions. And so my answer to that is that it would be worse to miss a deadline than to worry about the small percentage of schools where your ability to pay is taken into consideration for admissions. Even at schools that do take into account a family's ability to pay, they only take that into account for a small percentage of their final applicants for the class that they're admitting. So I would encourage everyone who is going to need financial aid not to hide the fact that you need financial aid, and to make sure that you get the applications in on time. It's not going to have a material impact on your admissions chances at all. Ayden, there were a couple of questions around some of the services or help that your organization can provide with helping with the applications, and so I thought it might be good for you to give kind of a brief summary of some of the support that you provide the students that participate.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I know that I had mentioned it kind of briefly during my section, but yes. So one of the, main, I guess I'm going to call it underutilized resources that I offer through Access Scholarships is my office hours. It kind of started as like a Friday office hours session where I have like a few hours open where students, anyone can put time on my calendar through the Access Scholarships website to basically talk about scholarships, to talk about, you need help researching schools, building your college list, like really just kind of navigating any aspect of scholarships, college, etc., even internships and stuff. Really just as coming from one student to another, I just really want to help anyone who needs it to kind of get through all those things, because I know that I had so many questions when I was going through it myself. So you can find the office hours link through the Access Scholarships website. If you just go into accessscholarships.com, there's a student resources tab, and then there's a general resources tab within that. And on that page, there is a link where you can sign up for office hours. But also, we will be sending out some sort of email/PDF after the event that will have information. And I believe my email address is on that. So if you can't figure out how to find the office hours link through the website, then you can definitely just send me an email and we can go back and forth to figure out what works. So that is super easy, and I'm always around. So
Great, thank you. And then the last grouping of questions, there were a number of international students in determining whether they might be eligible for financial aid. I dropped a link in the chat for the federal government's definition of eligible non-citizens. If you are not an eligible non-citizen and an international student, it is incumbent upon you to go talk to schools about what financial aid might be available. And each school has limited financial aid resources for international students. So as I said in the beginning of my presentation, that it depends is a pretty standard answer, and you'll have to reach out to each of the schools that you're interested in to see what might be available for international students.
That's
and
awesome.
the other comment on international students is, to Bill's point, some of them have specific loan programs that they manage themselves, just targeted to support the international students, and there are private lenders that will lend as well. So especially in the and I'm specifically referring to graduate degree programs, they're looking to attract really skilled people, and they understand that they can't afford some of these grad school tuitions.
So Alicia, I think we're ready to wrap.
Awesome. Thank you guys all so much. To the panelists, thank you all for joining here today and sharing such great tips with everyone on the call. And for everyone who attended, I hope you learned something new. I hope this is helpful as you continue to complete your FAFSA, look for scholarships, and also explore student loans too. I hope you were able to learn something today that helps you in the future as well. So thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and definitely look out for the recorded version of this webinar. Bye, everyone.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Good luck.